4 millennia before the rise of Emperor Palpatine, Jedi Knights struggle against the dark side of the Force and its minions. Ancient Sith sorceries have re-emerged after 1,000 years of peace. Can the Jedi Order and Galactic Republic overcome this threat and avoid galactic war? Tales of the Jedi Companion explores the Dark Horse comic series of the same name and the characters and technology of the time. So let's pry open the cover of this supplement for use with West End Games' Star Wars the Role-Playing Game, coming right up on RPG Retro Reviews. Hello everyone, welcome to my channel RPG Retro Reviews. I'm Captain Courageous and I review old school modules and games and try to give them a fun and informative analysis. This week I'm taking a break from D&D reviews and looking at a classic supplement for the Star Wars the Role-Playing Game, Tales of the Jedi Companion from West End Games. This RPG was and still is one of my favorites, and this supplement explores the Jedi and the powers of the Force as well as the dark side in great detail. So let's go ahead and pry open the cover and see what mysteries might be revealed inside, shall we? First, a little background. This supplement is for the Star Wars role-playing game from West End Games. I did do an extensive review of the RPG back in 2015, and you can still check out that video here. Furthermore, this supplement is a companion to the Dark Horse comics series of the same name, Tales of the Jedi, which ran from 1993 to 1998 and covers the Great Sith War and the Great Hyperspace War and predates the dawn of the Jedi comics and novels. The comics covered several time periods and stories around this era, but the supplement primarily covers the first story arc of the series, the Freedon Nad uprising on the planet Onderon, and the characters from that arc, and the saga of Nomi Sunrider are covered in the supplement. Characters detailed include Jedi Master Arca Jeth, young Jedi Kay Queldrama and his brother Ulic, and Jedi Apprentice Nomi Sunrider, as well as quite a few other important NPCs. The first chapter, An Era of Conflict, is dedicated to describing the state of the galaxy from this era and summarizing the events that occur in the first several issues of the Dark Horse comic. In fact, we get a full 8 pages of it, which, in my opinion, is where this supplement begins to go wrong. This space would have been better spent detailing the state of the government, providing a detailed timeline of events, and giving a better overview of the area rather than a plot summary of the comic series, including full panels and excerpts. Then in the next chapter, the Jedi, 18 pages are dedicated to full write-ups and backgrounds of the main protagonists and Jedi from the comic series, which, while perhaps interesting to fans of the comics, has little real practical value for anyone wanting to run a game in this era. Of course, the real meat of this supplement and the reason that this particular source book is much sought after is due to its coverage of the Force. In Chapter 3, Jedi Powers, it lists several new Force powers as well as new coverage of the dark side of the Force. This was released in 1996, several years before the Star Wars prequels, and thus the full scope of Jedi powers was generally unknown at that time and the subject of much speculation. To its credit, it gets a lot of things right, drawing from a lot of the Star Wars Extended Universe canon of the time. For convenience, all Force powers from the second edition rulebook are restated here, as well as new ones like Nomi Sunrider's battle meditation ability. This supplement is completely compatible with other versions of the second edition of the game, either the initial version or the revised and expanded version. It reiterates and restates all the powers from those rulebooks, as well as the basic rules of the Force and Force skill progression. The thing I really find most interesting are the dark side powers, things that instantly earn you a dark side point if you use them, and there are rules that allow a Jedi to use powers they do not possess, but more on that in a moment. Chapter 4 is the SITH REBORN, and here we get another breakdown of characters from the comic series. This potentially has a bit more value to a game master, as it can provide some antagonist NPCs or templates for them for their campaign, but the NPCs are very Dark Horse Comics specific. For example, Queen Aminoa isn't that useful of a character, in that she's integral to the first story in the comic series, but is killed off within the first few issues. Certainly you could use the stats and just reskin her to be used as a character of your own making. More frustrating still is the sheer volume of space dedicated to dramatic storytelling of scenes from the comics, which comprises about half of this chapter. That and actual comic panels excerpts. Total of 10 pages dedicated to this sort of thing, and once again, its value to a game master's campaign is limited. Chapter 5 is SITH Powers, and this is a very useful and interesting chapter. This could be of value to any game master for just about any era, and provides information on SITH holocrons and how they work, SITH artifacts and what they do, and then several examples are provided along with how such things work in-game. Obviously sourced from examples in the comic series, but such things could be used directly or provide the game master with information for such things of their own design. Then 3 pages are dedicated to more Star Wars fiction, which is not very well written, practical, or useful. What is useful, though, is the information on things like the alchemy of Sith swords, the destruction of Sith talisman, and a very detailed breakdown of Sith disciplines. This kind of information is why many seek out the Sourcebook. Regardless of what Star Wars era you're running, this sort of thing can be the basis for an entire story arc or campaign. Here you'll find a list of SITH powers such as Bolt of Hatred, Waves of Darkness, Drain Life Energy, and more. Obviously, using these powers incurs a dark side point for player characters, but is very useful for a game master wishing to construct their own dark side NPCs. In Chapter 6, more NPCs from the comics are detailed, and these can provide some great antagonists for the game master to use in their own campaigns, and not just in this era either. I can see the Hutt character Boga being used in a Clone Wars era campaign, or even one run in the post-Battle of Endor Mandalorian era setting. I particularly like the sections dedicated to describing how criminal organizations work, as well as the Republic forces that are dedicated to opposing them. One of the more interesting aspects of this era of Star Wars is the fact that hyperspace travel is still a bit treacherous. Rather than well-developed hyperspace lanes like those in the modern era of Star Wars, faster-than-light travel is provided by hyperspace beacons. Travel using these devices takes a lot longer, and the further one travels from the core worlds of the Republic, the less reliable such things are. While the Republic does provide jump beacon patrols and maintenance crews, the sheer volume of the things means that the best maintained and the best protected beacons are those near the core worlds, while outer rim beacons are subject to poor maintenance and potential danger from pirates. Obviously, this kind of thing might just be the springboard for many adventures. Chapter 7, Species, is another useful chapter using the species rules from Star Wars 2nd Edition. 4 more potential player character species are detailed. Obviously, from the comics, my problem here is that it is so limited. This would have been a good place to offer additional player character species options of their own unique design, and given the sheer volume of potential civilizations from the Star Wars universe, limiting it to just the things discussed in the comics seems a bit of a waste. This chapter is only 4 pages long. Chapter 8 is Creatures. The horrific flying Boma beasts from the comics are detailed here, as well as the Colossus wasps, the Gormworm, the Hissis, the Neek, and Weirbeast. Clearly useful for any GM's campaign, but also limited. Only 4 pages to this chapter as well. Chapter 9 is dedicated to vehicles and starships. Given that this is an entirely new era, this needed to be significantly more detailed than it is. Specific ships from the comics are covered, such as the Nebulon Ranger, the Light Side Explorer, and the Starjacker are given some game statistics. But what is really needed here are more generic types of vessels. What kinds of capital ships does the Republic use? How about starfighters? How about more common ships such as freighters and the like? All of that kind of thing for this era is left for the GM to develop, and thus you won't find any TIE fighter or Star Destroyer equivalents here, which greatly limits its usefulness. Obviously, you can just use the stats here and rename the ships for your own campaign, but the variety here is greatly limited. In Chapter 10, Technology of the Era is provided, and once again, this needed to be a bit more meaty than it actually is. Items of interest here are the rocket pack and pulse wave blasters. Chapter 11 is dedicated to the various locations described in the comic series. Once again, what should be a rather detailed chapter is notoriously thin, coming in at only 7 pages. Obviously dedicated to those planets described in the comics, such as Onderon, Taboon, the moon Vodasha. Such things could be stolen and used for a campaign in any era, to be fair, but the information given here is the bare minimum, which are bullet point lists of the type of planet it is, gas, giant, barren moon, population, day cycles, and so forth. A few paragraphs are dedicated to Republic City, which is the name of the metropolis on the planet Coruscant, but so much is just a mention and could have used a bit more fleshing out. These are essentially starting hooks, but the real meat of development for the things mentioned here will have to be provided by the Game Master. Chapter 12 is running a Tales of the Jedi campaign, and if you thought that this is the chapter that will bring it all together and provide the real meat of the supplement for the Game Master, you would be wrong. Everything here is given the most cursory of explanations. Clearly the thing of interest here is the impending coming of the Sith War, but what's missing here is a timeline of events to give the era some context in regards to other Star Wars era and the era itself. For example, from the time the Jedi discovered the tomb of Freedon Nad on Onderon to the Sith War, how many years pass? There are some interesting optional rules provided in this chapter, such as dramatic force use, but to be honest, I don't think they are very good. For example, dramatic force use allows a character to use a force power they don't know for 10 character points and 1 force point, which to me is way too expensive. No one is going to waste character points like that, especially if there's a big chance of failure. However, the rule does at least provide the option of such a thing. My own personal rule on this works in this way. The Force user need only spend a Force point to use a power they don't know, but they must meet the power's prerequisites. Further, die codes are not doubled when a Force point is used in this way. In addition, a Force user can call on any dark side power they meet the prerequisites for, and in that case, die codes are doubled. But of course, the character earns a dark side point, which to me reinforces the idea that the dark side is quicker and more seductive, but forever dominates your destiny. There is a section on the Star Wars skill lists and the few replacements that are specific to the era, which essentially replaces blaster skill with pulse wave pistol skill and a few other era-specific instances, but nothing that major. An astrogation chart adding in the planets and destinations mentioned in the locations chapter is provided. An era-specific Jedi code is given as well, and you can see the comparison between the two here. I also like the optional rules section, a slow progression into darkness, which could be used for any era of Star Wars, whereby a negative personality trait is acquired each time the character gains a dark side point. Chapter 13 is a solo adventure, Ruins of Kabas Deba. This is essentially a choose-your-own-path style adventure. The player is given a pre-made character named Kevel Rafan to play, and the basic rules of the game are reiterated just in case someone has purchased this supplement without actually owning the second edition rules set. It's basically an introductory scenario designed to teach a new player how to play the game. While this is fun to play, I find this entire thing to be a bit out of place. Clearly, the designers of the supplement thought that people from the comics would buy it because of their interest in the comics and then gravitate to the role-playing game, but how likely is it that someone would buy this book without actually owning the rules? 18 pages are dedicated to this adventure. What's really needed is a cool introductory adventure that introduces a group of players to this new setting, not an out-of-place teaching solo scenario. Finally, we get the character templates, and alarmingly, there are only 7 here. And wow, are they kind of limited. What would have been useful here are updated templates from the rule book that might cross over, such as Bounty Hunter, but with appropriate background examples, or at the very least a list of templates from the rules book that are appropriate, and perhaps a few that have been reworked for this era. So let's go ahead and take a look at Tales of the Jedi Companion for the Star Wars D6 role-playing game on my D20 scale of style, presentation, and value. Style-wise, this one is both a hit and a miss. If you are a fan of the Dark Horse comic series, then the many comic panels, inserts, and full-color splash pages of the various characters might be of interest. If not, it's probably not all that useful, even as a source of inspiration for this era of Star Wars. I do like the artwork here, and at the time the inclusion of full-color artwork pages was still relatively novel. I'll rate this a 14. As far as presentation goes, this thing is all over the map. By and large, the included material can serve as inspiration for the GM to come up with their own original character concepts, but does not serve as something the GM will use directly. The sourcebook itself seems woefully inadequate for actually running a Star Wars campaign in this era that takes place 5,000 years before the main Rebellion era Star Wars timeline. Obviously, in the year 2022, with the Knights of the Republic video games covering this era, there is a lot more information available online than back in, say, 1996. However, in my opinion, the supplement sticks far too close to its source material, which has limited appeal. So you have specific character and creatures from the comics, but that alone is not enough to offer everything a game master will need to accurately portray the Sith War era setting. Certainly, a game master can come up with these things on their own, and given that this is 2022 and 1996, and there's a tremendous number of resources available for doing so, as I've always said, if you're going to have to put that much time and work into getting it ready to run for your campaign, why do you need the source book? Of course, as a companion volume to this book, I would highly recommend the very excellent and free Star Wars 2nd Edition Revised, Expanded, and Updated Rules, which includes a tremendous amount of information, including material from the prequels. A link for that PDF will be in the description. I'm going to rate this a 12. Finally, let's talk value as a resource for Star Wars D6 force powers, especially those pertaining to the Sith. This book is probably a must-have, but as a supplement for running Sith War era Star Wars, it's terribly lacking. Getting your hands on the print version of this book in good condition on eBay will run you about $75 to $85 plus shipping, which is just too expensive in my opinion, and unfortunately, due to the many licensing issues provided, getting a PDF legally for this book is just not possible, though certainly even nominal Google skills will allow someone to find it. I'll give this a value rating of 10, and that brings my overall rating for the Tales of the Jedi Companion from West End Games to a 12, above average. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you found this review fun, useful, and interesting. I'd like to take the time to thank all my patrons who make this channel what it is and these videos possible. Thank you so much. Next week, I'll be stepping away again from D&D related materials and taking an in-depth look at the Barbarians of Lemuria RPG, a pulp fantasy style role-playing game with its own unique game mechanics. Plus, give this video a like, comment, and share. Please check out my Teespring store for great gaming swag, t-shirts, carry bag, coffee cups, and more. Join the channel's Facebook page, RPG Retro Reviews, and consider supporting the channel by becoming a patron yourself. Or alternatively, you can just send a tip through the PayPal tip jar. A link is in the description. And as always, my friends, may your D20 roll true, and game on.